All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, yeah, we got a big grab bag of
Hmm.
things to discuss as
Yep.
we're sliding into the end of Women's History Month. But I'm going to say the same thing I said for Black History Month, for Women's History Month. No, it's never over. It's never ever over. It's 365. It's 366 in a leap year. Like you and I don't let these issues go
Hmm.
unnoticed, undiscussed, unexamined. We just continue
Right.
on throughout the year, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I learned just the other day that the state of Colorado is the only state or the first state to honor a state holiday for a woman. The woman is something Cabrini. I don't remember the person's first
Uh-huh.
name. I think they're a Catholic nun, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry
Mm-hmm.
that I don't know it, but apparently we have a state holiday, like so state employees get the day off, and it's the first one that exists for a woman, like not nationally, but like there's no other state
Yeah.
holiday if that makes sense. And I was like, oh, okay, well, great. I have no idea who this person is, but woohoo!
Well, we're gonna find out for sure.
Yeah,
That's cool. That's very
yeah.
cool. Well, good.
So
Well, as if there aren't enough women to celebrate, of course. I
right,
mean,
right,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's awesome. That's great. That's great. Well, Lisa, we have to give about a relatively balanced view of what's provided. We know how many times we have talked about Colorado and certain things that don't go the way we want them to.
right.
So give credit when credit is due.
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? A little step forward.
Yeah, there you go. Little step forward. Yeah, well, that's great. I'm going to have to look it up then before we go. Um, but let's dive into our word of the week. So, Dr. Lisa, we talk about so much stuff on this podcast that sometimes I think, okay, let me just make sure we're not, uh, circling the block on something we've already talked about. But you know how it goes. There are words, phrases, definitions that get more and more nuanced. And so we just want to acknowledge that nuance. And so what I do know is that we have talked before about whether it was romantic relationships, interpersonal relationships, and resulting loneliness. I think one time we talked about loneliness specifically when it came to men and women that are happily single. I remember that conversation one time.
Yep, yep.
So let me give this word or phrase to you in a different way.
Okay.
So, last presidential administration, back in 2023, the Surgeon General specifically put out a report on social connection and community. And I remember having those conversations about workplace climate and some other things, but this one was more broadly speaking to social connection and community, in that loneliness isn't just this bad feeling that you have, but it specifically harms both individual and societal health. And so the Surgeon General made some really great, clear connections between the heightened amount of loneliness that someone experiences means there can be a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and even premature death. And so he was making this connection between mortality impact and being socially disconnected, even to the point of being similar to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. And I was
Wow.
like, hold up, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this is the important data point here.
Hmm.
And so with that, what I think is really interesting now, there's another report that just came out more recently that we'll get into in our next phase. But this report kind of segues from social connection, community, and loneliness into workplace loneliness, which I thought was fascinating because, Lisa, I made an assumption that workplace loneliness was going to be everything post pandemic, since we all got sent home.
Mm.
Some came back, some never went
Yep.
back, some
Yep.
kind of went back. And workplace loneliness actually was happening before the pandemic, right? And so it really speaks to the expectations someone has in the workplace, knowing that the average person will spend about 90,000 hours at work over their
Oh
lifetime.
my gosh, that's terrifying.
I know, right? Exactly. 90,000 hours. And so this report suggests that there's of course, workplace loneliness exists, but also how it exists. There's a greater diversity of relationship types. And so it still connects to that predictor of well being. Relationships at work fit into that greater whole that shouldn't be ignored, especially when we're thinking about that larger health and well-being. And so with that, I think what's really interesting is that we have to pay attention. We thought that, oh, let's blame it all on the pandemic. But now, Lisa, since you know I've been kind of stuck on my AI stuff, here we go again with more AI information coming towards us. Most recent trends are indicating that workplace loneliness will persist due to some aspects of AI and remote work that will worsen employee loneliness. And so, all of that to say, this loneliness piece of things, we thought we were chalking it up to the men that were not in relationships and so forth. It is a broader stated epidemic within the US public, and now
Yeah.
specifically drilling down into workplace. So I just thought that was fascinating, especially
Hmm.
for me, considering that I'm sorry, I don't get lonely. I don't get lonely when I'm at work. I think that's part of my only
Yeah, I was gonna
childness.
say, yeah.
But Lisa, how does that land on you?
Well, I think it's just interesting that, people will understand loneliness, the definition of loneliness, but you breaking it down into these different subcategories. I mean, I guess I'd never really thought about workplace loneliness. Like I've just had dinner with a friend who was a work friend originally. We don't work at the same place anymore, but 26 years we've been friends, right? So, and working in higher education, as you and I did, we're surrounded by people all the time. But I guess being surrounded by people doesn't necessarily make you lonely. But the remote piece is really interesting. Like, because one of the things I've thought about is working from home. I don't get to interact with a lot of people in person, right? So we're on Zoom, we're doing all these other things. So it's not per se that I'm lonely. But as that gets exacerbated and artificial intelligence continues to grow, I could see that a place where individuals might go work for social connection doesn't materialize, and that's just going to get worse. It is interesting to think about it that way, that it's different.
Mm,
Yeah.
well, and I'm not saying that I'm anti community at work. I'm just simply saying I don't. It's an optional for me. Just because I'm such an independent worker anyway. Teams drive me batty. I mean, yes, I can do them. I facilitate them all the time, but teams drive me batty sometimes because it's of course when you work more collaboratively, that slows things down a bit. I'm just wondering because we sit at this intersection of generations that a lot of Gen Xers are very comfortable working independently. Not that
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
anti collaborative, but it's just that they're intrinsically motivated versus being extrinsically motivated, where the work won't get done unless I meet with my accountability partner, or the work won't get done unless I meet with the committee. No, Lisa, how much work? I mean, I would suggest 99.99999% of our work as consultants. No one wakes us up and says, here's your to-do list.
Right. Right. It's all
And but that's
self-motivated.
kind of how I've been wired my whole life is
Mm-hmm.
I'm not assuming that other people get it done. And I just wonder how much of it is just individual personality, Gen X characteristics. Yeah, I just wonder about that because, like, for example, this was a few years ago, did a equity audit for an organization, and it fell along these exact lines where millennials and younger, their expectations were building and having community at work. Gen Xers and those older were like, nah, I don't come to work for that. I really like that's nice, and I'm
Right.
not going to be rude or
Right.
antisocial. It's just that if I have it, great. If I don't have it, it doesn't change my uh experience of work because I come to work to get it done and go home to my family and the people that really matter to me or
Right,
matter to
right.
me differently. And millennials and younger are saying, no, all of this really matters to them. That's not right or wrong. It's just different. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out here.
Yeah, so it will play out exponentially worse, right, across the generations, because if that
Mm-hmm.
expectation of collaboration and group work and not being alone gets
Mm-hmm.
greater. Yeah, this is, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so what, I guess we'll just put a pin on that and watch the space.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get into phase one. All right, Lisa, I try to update us on all the things that are going on, especially in new reports that come out, new data sets, and so forth. And I was perusing LinkedIn and saw that the Mather Institute dropped a new report. And their lens is very interesting, Lisa. They consider themselves thought leaders in aging services research and industry innovation. This is not a new firm at all. They were founded in 1999, and their kind of tagline is ways to age well, which I thought was really cool in that this really dispels some of those myths around what we think we know about generations and age and so forth at work. And so as I was perusing LinkedIn, I found that they'd done three reports. This is the third one that we'll be talking about today. But their year one, they did an overview of Gen X, which I was all up into, Lisa, to find out what,
Yep, yep.
how similar am I to my cohort, if you
Uh-huh.
will. So, year one was the overview of Gen X. Year two was health and wellness among Gen X, which, of course, you and I both would be extremely interested in that. And now we're into year three, workplace evolution. Workplace evolution. And so they've kind of built an arc of a research agenda here. And so the study that I looked at specifically, this new report, it came from a nationally representative sample of approximately 4,000 folks, about 1,000 in each generation. And they're all employed as Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers. I think this is going to be really interesting, Lisa, because I have not seen a report of this scale cutting across so many generations.
Okay.
And what I think is going to be really interesting too is that it doesn't vilify. Thank goodness. Like every report or article that I read, especially in just broader journalism, it's vilifying one generation versus another. This one is better than that one for these reasons.
Mm-hmm.
This one is just giving you the data and you figure out what you want to do
Okay.
with it, right? And so here's their takeaways. First, the younger generations have broader expectations of their workplace, which I think is just spot on to my experience. I want to hear about your experience as well, but younger generations want their workplace to be more to them than just a
Right.
paycheck, benefits, etc. So that's one thing. The second thing is that younger employees have a greater loneliness in the workplace. And Lisa, in my mind, I'm thinking is, we continue to interpret these findings is that you could possibly have greater loneliness in the workplace because you have greater expectations of what it will be. Like I have a pretty low expectation of interaction with folks at
Right.
work. Like if I do, great. If I don't, that's fine. But my bar is relatively low. But if you have a high one and it's not happening, of course you're going to be disappointed in some ways around engagement and connection there. Their third point was Gen Xers fall in between generations regarding workplace stress, social connections, and then the use and perceptions of generative AI. So, of course, we are the middle child. I mean, let's just be real about it. We always
Yeah.
function as the
Mm-hmm.
stereotypical middle child. The fourth thing, though younger generations may be using AI more often, most Gen Xers most Gen Xers find it easy to adapt to new technologies in the workplace, and
Mm-hmm.
nearly one half of them have used AI on the job. Now, we do have reservations in trusting AI. We don't trust nobody, y'all. Gen Xers,
Yeah.
we give the side eye to everybody, most
Uh-huh.
people. institutions until proven otherwise. So that made complete sense to me. And then finally, generations are more alike in the workplace than many stereotypes may suggest. I think that
Mm,
was very interesting considering their AI finding. Although obviously there's some differences that exist, preferences related to communication styles, work life balance, and technology adoption are largely similar. And I'm like, okay, this is cool because I love these mythbusters. The things that we thought we knew about one another. It's like, the
yeah, we've
data
talked
says
about that.
otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, so imagine, 4 generations in one workplace using AI, just using it differently and
Yeah.
having, coalescing around how they're using it and for what reasons. And so, anyway, my mind just exploded when I reviewed this report. But what do you think about that, Lisa, considering that we're in the same cohort here?
Yeah, it's funny because, as we've talked about before, Gen X is the one that always gets skipped over, right? Like, baby boomers and then millennials and then Gen Z. And I'm like, hello, there's an entire 15-year generation in there that you keep skipping over. So that there's actually a report focused on Generation X is very validating. And then there's just, I think one of the other pieces that you'd mentioned in the word of the week as well is that Generation X is kind of like stereotypically this group of people that were left to their own devices, right? You're playing out in the road until 10 or 11 at night and your parents aren't checking on you. And
Yeah.
the quote unquote latchkey kid, which was, you just get a key and you come home and your parents aren't there or whatever, and you're looking after yourself, you're cooking your own meals. And so I think there's just this independence that we just have and have always had. That speaks to not, so you're an only child plus you're a Gen Xer. So it's kind of this independence on steroids a little bit, right? And I wonder if that's why we get forgotten, because
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
just do the thing, right? And I've seen there's tons of memes going around now because a lot of Gen Xers are, in their late 40s or turning 50 or early 50s. And one of them was like, for Gen X, when you said to your parents, that's not fair, the response was, life isn't fair, get over it, or something. And I was like, that's totally true, right? Whereas now this expectation that we sit down and have a conversation about what does fair mean and how to, all this stuff. Whereas before, the TED Talk basically extended,
Exactly.
was like, life is not fair, period,
Exactly.
moving on.
Exactly.
So I think that's
Exactly.
yeah, we've certainly
Practical.
changed, and that's probably contributing to why younger generations have greater expectations of the workplace too, right? We've talked about that before with diversity and inclusion and social justice, and how younger generations, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, are having these expectations of workplace inclusion, which I think is echoed in these findings that you just read out to us. So, but you and I have also talked about differences between generations in the workplace. And there's a term what was the term that you have used before? I think we defined it one time. It was like something.
Gentelligence.
Yeah,
Gentelligence.
gentelligence. Yeah. So, and understanding
Megan
those
Gerhardt.
differences. But now what you're saying this survey is finding is that perhaps those differences are exaggerated, which is interesting.
Or at the very least, they may be collapsing a bit over the years now that everyone's has more work experience. I'm not quite sure, but
Yeah.
like even for example, in a couple of the data points, it said that so for example, Gintelligence, the reason why I love Megan Gerhardt's work around this, and run out and go subscribe to her LinkedIn newsletter. She has something every week that comes out about the generations. And what I loved about her work was that it stripped away the need for conflict between generations, which I thought was really important because the majority of what I had read
Yeah.
previously
Yeah.
was creating a stage for it, right? And so one of the data points in this particular study said that 70% of all generations agreed that they enjoy learning from their colleagues from different generations. And so that is diametrically opposed to this stereotyping of I'm one generation, you're another, my way is better than yours. And so I'm not interested in learning from either one of you. Like, but it strips away the conflict piece of things. And then the other data point that I thought was really important to think about, Lisa, is that 72% of millennials say that social connection with their coworkers is important. Now, combine that with 67% of Gen Xers who think social connection is less important, but they still plan on staying at work for at least 5 more years. This is going to be an interesting, I don't know, intersection of experiences because I'm thinking about the Gen Xers like, yeah, I got to work for 5 more years. I mean, look at the freaking economy. Of course, I got to work 5 more years,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
please, over these next five more years, don't expect me to be more connected, more cordial with you because I need to work towards retirement. Thank you kindly. Like I'm thinking about that whole conversation, and of course, a younger generation is like, why don't you want to connect with me? Let's talk. Let's go to happy hour afterwards. You know, come on, let's do something. I'm disappointed that you don't want to go with me. And Gen Xers are like, I got kids to take care of, parents, grandparents,
Yeah.
bills, and retirement. Leave me
I'm
alone, kid.
tired.
I'm tired. Exactly. Like I'm thinking about that whole conversation. And so I'm interested to see how that plays out over the years, Lisa, because I'm that Gen Xer where it's like, unless you're paying me to be at happy hour is at my house. Okay, my house. That's it. No, thank you. And that's not a knock against individuals or friendships with some versus the other, but I just do think that until you get to a certain age in life, it's just not on your radar what needs to be taken care of outside of work.
Yeah.
You just don't. I mean, if you don't have children yet, or if you're not in a partnership relationship, or if you don't have any responsibilities for caretaking for your parents or someone else, it's just not on your radar yet. It wasn't on mine until it started happening to me. I'm wondering, why can't you stay late for work? Why can't you do this? Why can't you come a little bit earlier? I didn't realize that not only should I not be asking for that to happen, but there's an entire system that doesn't allow that to happen. Here we are. So I think that's going to be interesting as things play out.
Yeah, I do, and I think this whole discussion that we keep coming back to is just going to evolve, right?
That's right. That's right.
Because so much has changed from baby boomers to Gen Alpha. If we think across that time span in terms of, and the point about us being adaptable and flexible with technology, I think is true, right? Because cell phones kind of came out, they kind of took off in our teens and 20s, and the internet took off when many of us were either at university or going out into the workplace, and email came into the world. And so we have, as a generation, witnessed the before times and the after times, right? And so I think more than any other generation, I mean, baby boomers to some degree, but not to the same degree. They were much older, right? But really for us, it's the prime of our life, 20 to 50, that
That's right.
those changes have been happening, and it's forced us to be adaptable. And plus we learned that independence, right? If you're not going to do it, no one's going to do it for you.
That's right. That's right. So Lisa, I will drop into the show notes the Mather report in full that folks can download. It's quite a lengthy report. I think it's like 75 pages. But to your exact point on, I think it's early on in the report, page 6 or 7 or so, it does exactly that, Lisa. It gives a really lovely figure that's a timeline of social and technological changes across the workforce, across the generations. So it goes all the way from 1960s into the Civil Rights Act and so forth. And then it goes all the way to 2020 and beyond, where we have a pandemic. It leads to more remote work, hybrid and gig work, social movements that are causing companies to focus on DEI and sustainability, and then the rise of AI usage in the workplace. So it takes you all the way through those decades, color coded by when generations were experiencing things. And guess what? I think we're teal. The Gen Xers that are teal, we touch every single decade of that, even if you're at the later end of the 60s going into the
Yeah.
70s. you have some knowledge of what occurred, or you have parents that lived it. And so you have a front seat to what was going
Mm-hmm.
on across the generation. So I'm like, oh, I need to sit with this for a minute. I need to sit with this for a minute. I'm not exiting the workforce anytime soon. And
Right.
so with that, we're going to have to grapple with that. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really important. So we're not
Yeah.
going anywhere. Gen Xers, we hang in there. We just hang in there.
We
So,
do. We do.
oh, goodness. All right. Well, Lisa, take us into phase two.
Okay, so I have a little. I feel like I say this every week now. I have a grab bag of things, but they're all oriented around the same kind of central point, I guess. So a few weeks ago, you may remember that a couple of deposition videos were out on the internet and just took off like wildfire of two young DOGE bros who were being deposed as part of the National Endowment for the Arts lawsuit related to all of those grants that got cut. And it was an interview related to their, I mean, it was a deposition, so they did everything, but the pieces that got released were related to their process for doing that, right? And so essentially, I'm going to quote here from a piece that I'll drop into the show notes, but it says, but instead of looking closely at funded projects, they pulled short summaries off the internet and fed them into an AI chatbot. The prompt was simple. Does the following relate at all to DEI? Respond factually in less than 120 characters. Begin with yes or no. And then the results were sweeping and sometimes bizarre. For example, building improvements at an Indigenous languages archive in Alaska risked, quote unquote, promoting inclusion and diverse perspectives. Renewal of a long-standing grant to digitize Black newspapers and add them to a historical database was DEI. So was work on a 40-volume scholarly series on the history of American music, a documentary about Jewish women's slave labor during the Holocaust. Because of the focus on gender, it risked contributing to DEI by amplifying marginalized voices. And so, I mean, it's not funny. It's like absolutely abhorrent, right? And so these two guys are just like matter-of-factly saying this is what they did, and they have absolutely no remorse about it. And then I think one of them was asked to define DEI, and he couldn't do it. So it's just these young white men who, don't apparently have much of a conscience. And so all of these really important projects that may or may not actually have anything to do with DEI, but because they have African American or woman or Jewish, right? Therefore, they got cut. And so it was simply this process by which they just did that and then was like, okay, this grant's gone, this grant's gone, this grant's gone, this grant's gone. So there was no real thought process, which actually lends a lot of credence to the lawsuit's argument, which is that it's a violation of various constitutional amendments in the Administrative Procedures Act and things like that, right? If you can't show a strategy and a rationale and you let AI determine, like, you don't have a lot to stand on. So I'll stop there. I want to hear your thoughts of those two videos that were out there, and then I'll move on to my next thing.
Yeah, I think I hung in there for maybe 1 minute of the video. I could just tell by the body language alone that the topics were not being taken seriously. Now I'm throw in all the stereotypes. You got younger white males in a deposition. I'm like, okay, I'm already starting out with a trust level of 0 before you even
Yep,
open your
yep.
mouth, before I've even heard anything yet. So I granted, I give that. But then once I see the flippant lack of logic,
Yeah.
and in addition to the lack of logic, because Lisa, we've been there on this podcast where we talked about there are individuals that provide logic that no, it wouldn't take us to the same place, but at least it's a step-by-step logical process. This is not logical, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then number two, no, I'm not even asking for remorse because I'm not asking anyone to have feelings about this, but no cognizance of the wide sweeping effect of such lackadaisical filtering.
Right. Right.
Let's just get rid of everything that has women in it. And so now who does that affect exactly? No, which again feeds into our chronic frustration around systems thinking.
Yeah.
It's almost
Yeah.
robotic. It is robotic. You put it into AI and then determine what, I mean, I think that that's on brand for what they do and who they are. It's on brand. As disappointing as it is, as lacking in critical thinking as it is, it kind of goes back to a workshop that I sat in on last week where there was a lovely workshop that connected analog critical thinking with AI and how most times we position this as either or when it could have been compatible if we still had our analog critical thinking skill sets.
Yeah.
So this is not shame on y'all for using an AI tool to figure things out. It's shame on y'all for using an AI tool lacking ethics and
Yeah.
applying them to everybody's day-to-day lives and how it's affected people.
Yeah, and they're just saying we were just abiding by the president's executive order on this, and it's so, yeah. I mean, I don't have words for how angry it makes me because it's so, yeah. Oh God, it's so surface level, So like diversity, equity, inclusion only applies to non-white, non-male, non-straight, non-Christian people. So everything that falls outside of that particular group is by default DEI, and let's get rid of all of it. Like it's such a such a simplistic and limited I don't know that these kids, I wouldn't necessarily call them stupid, right? It's not that they don't have intelligence, but anyway, so
I would call them stupid.
You would call them stupid.
Well, no, just because you got to think of who's leading them.
Yeah.
If they lack the wisdom to discern that the person that gave them any parameters for discretion doesn't make logical sense, yeah, that does not reflect any intelligence to me at all. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. It doesn't.
And not, I mean, I'll say it again, I've said this 1,000 times, DEI is not illegal. It doesn't matter that there's an executive order, right?
Yes.
Because it's not like, DEI is not a violation of the Civil Rights Act. So anyway, so this, on the heels of these video releases, I came across a piece in NPR that was about providing funding or providing shelters for women who are experiencing domestic violence has become quote unquote radioactive. So one of the women that they interviewed for this article, I think they're from Honduras and has been working to support women who have experienced violence in their relationships for like 22 years or something. And the Trump administration's massive cuts to USAID, but, have damaged the capacity for all of these organizations globally to address violence against women. And so a global survey by UN Women published in October of last year found that more than 40% of organizations working to end violence against women and girls had to scale back life-saving services or shut down completely in the past year because of funding cuts. So in some locations, there are not many domestic violence shelters. And so women and girls who were seeking refuge at these locations, it was challenging anyway, right? And now those same locations may not be able to exist anymore. And so this woman and kind of other folks that were featured in the article basically connected the dots that, similar to what we just talked about with anything that is, not white, heterosexual, male, Christian, is therefore by default DEI, the same thing, right? So if we're providing money to fund a shelter, because that shelter houses women and girls, it's DEI and we're not going to fund it anymore. And so then then people's lives are on the line. And so, this is Women's History Month, the end of Women's History Month. So we have that. And then we also have, I'm sure you heard this, Shauna, that the UN women, so there's a UN Women and they have a commission on the status of women. And they released in early March their quote unquote agreed conclusions, which is a document of conclusions that this status on the Commission on the Status of Women agrees to. And the United States was the only country to vote against it. So if I am remembering correctly, 32 countries voted for it. The US voted no, and then there were like 4 or 5 countries that abstained. And of those 4 or 5 countries, one of them was Saudi Arabia and one of them was Egypt, I think. But one of the reasons the United States gave for voting against this agreement was that it promoted quote unquote gender ideology. And let me read you the intro to this quote, this agreed conclusions, which is the document. It says, ensuring and strengthening access to justice for all women and girls, including by promoting inclusive and equitable legal systems, eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and addressing structural barriers. That's the like opening sentence for this document. And the United States voted against it. So you've got all these grants being cut that is beyond just women, right? But gender is a piece of that. You've got this global crisis now for violence against women and domestic violence shelters, and then you've got the United States voting against this document. That it's never voted against that before. Like it's just anyway. What are your thoughts?
Well, Lisa, the easiest way that I've been thinking about this this illogical administration is reading the opposites. So we're not ensuring and we're weakening access to justice for all women and girls, including by promoting exclusive and inequitable legal systems. Like the fact that you don't want to sign on to this says that you support the opposite of this.
Right.
That's what you're saying. So, and without explanation, which I think is fascinating, because it would be something different if they're saying, because I realize how that, especially when it comes to policy work, that yes, of course it's nuanced, but the reality that the United States, especially this administration, never gives a nuanced response as to why. It's just patently, no, we don't do things your way. We don't collaborate on anything with anybody. We're going to continue to alienate our previous allies, and we're going to continue to be in unprecedented ways exclusive to the world in our stances against anybody but white, straight, Christian men.
Right.
It's telling. So everything that they vote against, I read it the exact opposite. So
Yeah.
what you're saying by not signing off on this is that you are okay with discriminatory laws against women, policies against women, practices against women, and you don't want to acknowledge by signing on this that there are structural barriers, because by signing on to this, you have to acknowledge that there are structural barriers that need to be addressed. You're just going to say you're ignoring all that? Okay. That's what you've communicated to the world.
Well, I mean, and the Heritage Foundation, which is the right wing think tank and the author of Project 2025, released another document. I'm forgetting the name of it, but in that they're advocating for the end of no fault divorce, and trying to essentially like limit access to educational financing as a means to keep women from progressing. And they want the family unit, which is obviously heterosexual, that the woman stays at home and has lots of babies, and they tend to the home, and the husband goes out and is the breadwinner, right? Because of course it's a marriage. And so this whole new document kind of spells out all of the policy ways that they could do that. So in that sense, yes, you're right? There aren't, what do you mean there are structural barriers? No, there are not structural barriers, because women should be in the home, right? And laws are not discriminatory because they're just abiding by, natural gender perspectives or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yep. So, I'm paying attention to what we don't sign on to. Um, and again, reminding all of us the the silence, I need a better phrase for this. This probably is ableist. The silence is deafening. It's the non-response tells us everything we need to know. The
Mm-hmm.
no votes tell us everything we need to know. The no votes tell us their stance. A vote, yes, acknowledges these uh, structural issues in the country. So saying yes, I mean it's on brand for them not to vote for this. It's on brand because it then means an acknowledgement, which then means there has to be some accountability for it. Like you can't say yes, structural barriers
Right.
exist for women in your country and then not do anything about it.
And then not do anything. Yeah.
That to me that then would piss me off further because now you're being performative. You're saying yes, this exists to the whole world, but in our country you're not doing anything about it. At least it's on brand. At least they're consistent. No, we don't
Yeah.
believe this is true, and therefore we don't have to do anything about it because it doesn't exist here.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yeah.
equitable across gender,
Oh, yeah, because
including the genders we don't even
yeah,
acknowledge.
right. Because equity or equality is not men and women working in the workplace and earning the same amount of money. It's men in the workplace, women in the home, right? Yeah. So anyway, that was. We'll drop all the
Mm-hmm.
links in the show notes here for you all to read that if you'd missed the UN thing. It did not get a lot of like I didn't hear a lot about it on the kind of mainstream news like the
Mm-hmm.
NBCs and such.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty big deal, I think. But
Mm-hmm. Well, it's it's one of those moments where, it's not a big deal. So let's try to make sure it stays under the radar. Like I feel like the majority of this presidential administration has been the things that we blatantly see are just scratching the surface of the things that we don't
yeah,
blatantly
that we
see
don't
that
see.
aren't in the news, that aren't, top headlines for us. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, what more are they doing that we're not even aware of that have been buried
Yeah, yeah,
that we have to figure out? So yes.
man.
So pay attention. Look, that's why I keep saying anybody that tries to tell us or listeners to this podcast that being woke is like a slap in the face slur, I'm like, I beg to differ. Pay attention. That's what woke means. Pay attention to what's going on in the world. Those that aren't paying attention look up and they're like, oh, how did
Yep.
gas go up by 80% this week?
Yeah,
I wonder why. Systems.
yeah.
I mean, just all the things that occur in our world on a day-to-day basis that people are like, how did this happen? What's my policy, Lisa? My policy is you may not do politics, but politics does you every single day. Every single
Mm-hmm.
day. And this feels like yet another one for
Yeah,
especially for us as women,
yeah,
and our trans siblings as well as you may not want to care about this particular statement, but it certainly cares about you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think this whole podcast, you mentioned radioactive. I think this whole episode is radioactive at this point because these are issues that, especially given our economy, people have to work. They need to work. They are desperately trying to pull ends to meet together,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time dealing with life outside of work that
Yeah,
is not conducive to women and non-men in this
yeah.
country. Let me put it that way. It's just infuriating. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right. Well, look, that's it, y'all, for this week's episode of the Unfazed, Unedited podcast. Please don't forget you can reach us on all of your social media and podcast apps at Unfazed Unedited, or just email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com with ideas, topics, etc. And we live on our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can find all the old and the new episodes. So if you like this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends. Look, this one, especially with coworkers or
Mm-hmm.
others in
Yep.
this phase of your life. So until next week.
All right. See you next week.